Okay, people, if I could ask you to do one final hug of the person that's next to you so you have one shot of warmth. And then we'll take our seats, please. And we'll get started. We're obviously having some technical difficulties, you can see behind me. That's why we're a little late on the start. But in these rather balmy weather, hi there, we want to get going. So first off, if everyone could take their seats, please. And don't be shy to huddle up with your neighbor. I notice the back wall seems to be very popular. That's okay. Usual request to turn cell phones off, please. Les téléphones cellulaires, s'il vous plaît, si vous pouvez les fermer. Good morning. Bonjour. Dzień dobry. Shalom. I want to welcome you here today on behalf of the National Holocaust Monument Committee and thank you for coming to share with us this poignant moment of remembrance. Remember the over 1 million people murdered at Auschwitz, predominantly Jews, but also many others, including the Roma and Polish and Soviet prisoners. It was 80 years ago today that Russian soldiers liberated the survivors. By your presence and your actions and being here today, you help the world to remember and in these troubled times to never forget. I want to introduce you to the President of the National Holocaust Monument Committee, Annette Wildgoose.
Bonjour et bienvenue au Monument national de Holocauste à Ottawa, ainsi que à tous nos téléspectateurs qui se joignent à nous via live stream. Bonjour. L'honorable Madame Bendayan, ministre des langues officielles et ministre associé de la sécurité publique, bonjour. L'honorable Monsieur Poilievre, chef de l'opposition, membre du Parlement, Mayor Sutcliffe, Your Excellencies, military attaches, members of the interfaith communities, invited speakers and guests, welcome, shalom. I see so many of you whom I recognize, and I see so many of you who are here, perhaps for the first time, to join with us in commemorating the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, 27th of January, 1945, to the date. This day is about the Holocaust. For those who survived, and we have a member, Ruth Katz, who is with us with Flora Love, who is braving the weather to be with us. Thank you so much. And for those who are still able to tell us their stories, and to those who came before us and cannot. J'ai maintenant le même âge que ma mère quand elle a commencé à parler de l'Holocauste. Toute sa famille a péri dans les camps de Auschwitz et Majdanek. The National Holocaust Monument Committee is grateful for the assistance of all of our partners, and you know who you are, in the delivery of this commemoration today. The Embassy of Poland, through Ambassador Dzielski, has taken a central role in facilitating today's program. We thank you. I trust you will find today's commemoration both informative and moving. Merci.
It's wonderful with all the gloves. It's a kind of a muffled applause. You know, it's just perfect. Thank you, Annette. It's my pleasure to invite the Honorable Rachel Bendayan, Minister of Official Languages and Associate Minister of Public Safety, to offer remarks. Welcome.
Shalom. Ambassadors, rabbis, dignitaries, and all attendees. En ce jour de réflexion et de commémoration, j'ai l'honneur de me joindre à vous au nom du gouvernement du Canada et du Premier ministre qui est présentement en Pologne pour marquer ce jour solennel. Before going any further, I would like to acknowledge the ceasefire deal, which led to the return of hostages to Israel. We are thinking of them as they reunite with their loved ones, and of all the families still awaiting the remaining hostages in captivity. Our government continues to call for the safe return of all hostages and for those murdered. We call for the return of all hostages, and for those murdered by Hamas, like Canadian Judith Weinstein-Haggai, to have their remains returned. May their memories be for a blessing. Today is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and the horrors that took place behind its barbed wire gates. For these last 80 years, the Holocaust has been a harrowing reminder of humanity's capacity for inhumanity. A stark warning for us all to never again allow such hatred and horror to go unchecked. Ces souvenirs, nous les avons gravés dans la pierre ici, du Monument national de l'Holocauste, telle une cicatrice. Et c'est pour cette raison que nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui, pour soigner cette cicatrice, pour nous souvenir de la tragédie qui l'a causée et pour reconnaître que nous en subissons encore les contre-coups. Indeed, we are witness to the rise of anti-Semitism around the world. From right here at home, too close to home for me, where only a few blocks away from where I live in Outremont, a Jewish elementary school was shot at not once, not twice, but 3 times. From Australia to Germany and to the United States, where we recently saw public figures riling up crowds with salutes associated with the Third Reich. On platforms large and small, we see the normalization of hate. We must fight back. That is why our government is committed to holding a national forum on combating anti-Semitism. Our goal is clear: to turn the tide against anti-Semitism and ensure that Jewish Canadians are safe. Safe in their synagogues, safe in their schools, safe in our businesses and in our neighborhoods. By convening all levels of government, including provincial justice and public safety officials, mayors and municipalities, law enforcement and stakeholders, we affirm that never again is real. Never again is now. In collaboration with police of jurisdiction and civil society, all levels of government will commit to concrete solutions to address the alarming rise in anti-Semitic violence across our country. Today, I am pleased to announce that our National Anti-Semitism Forum will be held on March 6th, 2025, here in our nation's capital. Ce forum est une occasion de directement confronter la montée alarmante des discours, des gestes et des actes haineux que nous voyons à travers le monde, y compris ici au Canada. Aujourd'hui, soulignons non seulement une commémoration, mais notre volonté à éradiquer l'antisémitisme. In 2024, I helped put together a $90 million package from our government, which included creating a new permanent National Holocaust Remembrance program, which included supporting the construction of the Montreal Holocaust Museum, which included funding to keep our communities safe against hate-motivated crime. We redoubled and expanded our efforts to protect our synagogues, our schools, and our community centers through the Security Infrastructure Program. And today I am pleased to announce that 6 projects have been approved for funding under the new National Holocaust Remembrance Program, funding to support initiatives that seek to preserve the memory of the Holocaust and help improve Canadians' understanding and awareness of the Holocaust and of contemporary forms of anti-Semitism. The very worthy organizations receiving federal funding are the Canadian Society for Yad Vashem, the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center of Holocaust Studies, the Jewish Federation of Victoria and Vancouver Island Society, le Musée de l'Holocauste de Montréal, the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, and the Toronto Holocaust Museum. I am sure that it is not lost on you that I am a very new minister, appointed at a very peculiar moment in politics for a very uncertain amount of time. It certainly isn't lost on me. Only days into my new role, I became aware of a conference to be held in Mississauga by Hizbut Tahrir, an organization I had never heard of before, but with a mandate I know all too well: the glorification of violence and the propagation of hate and anti-Semitism. Not in Canada, I said. Not knowing what, if anything, I could do, I began to hold meetings on the HUT and looking into the process of listing this and organizations like it. Not knowing what, if anything, would come of it, I wrote a letter condemning HUT in the strongest possible terms. A day after publishing that letter, 24 hours later, HUT announced that it was canceling their event. It was an important lesson for me, one that I promise you that I will not forget. The truth is, each and every single one of us has the power to effect positive change. Comme nous l'avons déjà déclaré à maintes reprises, la communauté juive n'est pas à mener seule le combat contre l'antisémitisme. En tant que Canadiens, nous devons faire front commun dans un esprit d'ouverture et de compréhension pour faire reculer la haine. I know that my time is coming to a close. I guess on a final note, I cannot help but notice that there are very, very few Holocaust survivors left to tell their stories, and we are so fortunate to have one here today with us. When I was a young girl, well, actually from the ages of 12 to 18, I was very, very involved with the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, an organization that is youth-run and youth-led, and that taught me a lot about politics and about organizing. After my first successful merger and acquisition as president of the newly minted Eastern Canada region, I brought Holocaust survivors to come and speak to hundreds and hundreds of young people. After they recounted their stories, I went backstage to thank those Holocaust survivors for their moving recounting, and one of them came up to me and he said, with such an intensity in his eye that it almost made me scared, I need you to understand. The responsibility is on your generation. I will not be here. You know what happened. You can never forget, and you can never let the world forget. I need you to understand the responsibility is on you. I know that everyone here shares that responsibility. Today is not a day for partisanship, and I'm sure that my colleagues from other political parties would agree. We shoulder the weight of never forget. We carry the responsibility of never again, and we carry it together.
Toda rabba, Rachel. I'd next like to invite the leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre, who's no stranger to this event. Pierre, some words, please.
Shalom, Minister, Your Excellency, ambassadors, but most important of all, the precious Ruth Katz, Holocaust survivor, great resident of Ottawa, here today with her wonderful daughter, Flora Love, a friend of mine of over a quarter century. Thank you for your courage and your persistence in carrying on this story. The 80th anniversary of the liberation of the prisoners in Auschwitz-Birkenau has a special and important meaning to me. About 15 years ago, I was tasked with representing the government of Canada at the March of the Living, which is an inspiring gathering of survivors and Jewish youth who walk from Auschwitz, the first concentration camp, to nearby Birkenau, which was by far the most prolific. We walked arms locked. I was privileged to be with a survivor who was over 80 years old. And when we arrived at the gates of Birkenau, he stopped suddenly and he said, "That's where he stood." And he pointed into the air. He said, "When I was a little boy, I walked in here, and there was Dr. Mengele." And Dr. Mengele, with the wave of a hand, would decide what would happen to each prisoner after a glance. Would they go immediately to the gas chamber, or would they be enslaved to days or weeks more intensive labor? And for reasons he did not know, he was given a pass. That was the vivid nature of it. Mengele was probably the personification of evil on earth. He exemplified all that was evil about the Nazi regime, the cruelty, the murder, the twisted and perverted ideologies. An ideology that, though it did tremendous damage and killed over 6 million Jews, was ultimately defeated. The Jewish people triumphed. As I noticed symbolically, when I looked around to see the beautiful stars of David flying on Israeli flags all through that march. In the background was the echo of a cantor singing the psalmody, Psalm 23. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil." We were literally in the valley of the shadow of death, with the barracks on each side and the lower ground in the middle. And we looked around as Jewish children placed stones on top of stones that they used as makeshift memorials, as if to say, "We haven't forgotten you. We still remember you. We still love you." That is the triumph of the Jewish people, who then later gathered their numbers and gave rebirth to the great state of Israel. And now, in that state, the Jewish people are the only people I know of who speak the same language, worship the same faith, on the same land as they did 3,000 years ago. And that doesn't mean it's without difficulty. We had all hoped that we had left the ugly, authoritarian, socialist ideologies of fascism and communism behind. But they came roaring back with extreme and radical movements. New threats emanating from Iran metastasized and exploded back into the forefront on October 7th. An unprovoked attack that was deliberately designed to carry out the maximum amount of cruelty against the most innocent people. A seven-front war initiated by Tehran seeks to carry out a Holocaust-like attack on the Jewish people. October 7th was the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. But in the period that had followed, Israel has fought back. The regimes and the terrorist groups that sought to annihilate Israel have themselves been annihilated. And Israel has friends, as do the Jewish people. Friends that will stand through thick and thin, through fire and water, not equivocating, not speaking out of both sides of our mouth. We must stand with the Jewish people and the state of Israel in their effort to preserve their existence and to live a peaceful, democratic life. And that should not be taken for granted. We see on our own streets anti-Semitism, guided by obscene, woke ideologies that have led to an explosion in hate crimes. Hate crimes were up over 100% in Canada before October 7th. Now they're up 251%, with Jews being the principal victims of those crimes. We must not just condemn these things, we must take action against them. We must deport from our country any temporary resident that is here on a permit or a visa that is carrying out violence or hate crimes on our soil. It was obscene that the IRGC remained legal in Canada for 4 years after it killed 55 of our citizens in the attack on PS Flight 752. It is outrageous that 700 IRGC officials are on Canadian soil, many of them living the lap of luxury on the fruits that they stole from their own people. And we must condemn when our own government gives grants for anti-racism to people like Leif Maruth, or appoints Birju Datani to head up the Canadian Human Rights Commission. We must stand up against these outrages and stand for bringing our people together, united in our common values, our common freedom, and our common love for our country and for humanity. Because in the end, we know the Jewish people will prevail. We know the state of Israel will live on. We as Canadians must live on as allies and friends, so that when we say never again, we mean it.
Thank you so much. Toda rabba. I'd invite the Israeli ambassador, Your Excellency, please come forward. Find your notes. Shalom.
80 years ago today, an ocean away, the 322nd Rifle Division of the Soviet Red Army marched through Poland's Auschwitz death camp's gates. On that day, from amongst countless articles of clothing and 8 tons of human hair, they were able to liberate 600 corpses the ovens had not yet incinerated, along with close to 7,000 remaining captives they were horrified to discover near death and under the most inhumane conditions. All told, Auschwitz has purged Europe of over 1.1 million Jews, my grandparents and grand-aunt among them. Today we commemorate the events culminating in that date in the past and in promise to the future. In promise to forthcoming generations of future free from repetition of horrors of the past, free from ignorance, from intolerance, free from hate, terror, and genocide. On October 7th, 2023, a lifetime from the date we commemorate, evil's proxies violated its promise at Israel's southern border. There they repeated history's most disgraceful patterns proudly for the world to see. In response, and around the world, we witnessed the resurgence of toxic patterns of ignorance, hatred, and denial. Old lies and libels, acts of violence, renewed and reborn. We witnessed leaderships and legal bodies bent to terrorist politics and under lawfare diplomacy easily confuse the pitfalls of appeasement for the promise of peace. In Canada, we experienced a 670% rise in anti-Semitic incidents in the year following October 7th. Jewish schools, synagogues, and institutions across Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia were targeted. The entrances to Shaare Zedek Synagogue in Vancouver, Beit Tikva Synagogue in Montreal, and Toronto's Leobec Jewish Day School set ablaze. Jewish cemeteries in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto desecrated with Nazi symbols. A hateful anti-Israel protest outside Ottawa's Soloway Jewish Community Center, directly across from the Hillel Lodge term care facility for seniors and before the very eyes of its Holocaust survivors' residents. Gunshots were fired upon Beis Chayamushka Jewish Elementary School in Toronto on 3 separate occasions. Violent acts and incitement to hatred striking at the moral core of Canadian society and its commitment to the preservation of civil liberties, all demanding a response, all crying out for action from all levels of Canadian education, law enforcement, and government. At Israel's border in Gaza, a lifetime from the promise of the day we mark today, Jews are once again held captive. 90 remaining hostages, dead or barely alive, are confined once again, suffering the most deplorable physical and psychological tortures. At the close of today, their captivity will have lasted an interminable 480 days. That is more than 11,480 hours, over 689,780 minutes, more than 41,380,880 seconds, each an eternity in terror. As I stand before you here today, an ocean and 8 years away from the liberation of Auschwitz and a lifetime from the promise of that date, I call for the liberation of all those who remain in captivity. I call for the release of all remaining hostages as I rededicate the promise of this date under the force of history for prosperity's sake and guaranteed now by virtue of one single great distinction not present at that time, and that is Israel. Israel restored, robust and resilient in the shadow of Auschwitz, returned to its ancestral land from which it stood and from which it will stand eternal against all attacks upon itself and upon its people, no matter where they be. With history as our witness and underlying promise of Israel, the Jewish people remain united, poised to prevail. With Israel, we are no longer condemned to cruel repetitions of history, nor will we abide persecutions or pogroms or Holocaust within or without our borders, not at home and not abroad. With Israel, the Jewish people are no longer, nor will ever again be, lambs for the slaughter. With Israel, we are the grizzly defending her lair, tearing tooth and clawing nail for the return of her cubs. We are the lion rampant of Judah, restored on its ancestral den, calling our children back home, roaring, reminding our enemies and our allies that we are the fulfillment of promise, Holocaust remembrance and liberation, just as we continue to fulfill that promise against the rising of global anti-Semitism. For the sake of our people, as for the sake of those freedom-loving peoples of this world. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Ambassador Dzielski from the Republic of Poland to please come and give remarks. Dzień dobry.
It is chilly today, but that's the way it should be on this day. Survivor, minister, leader of the opposition, ambassadors, high commissioners, members of parliament, senators, leaders of civic organizations, members of the Jewish community, members of the Polish community, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by expressing my deep gratitude to the Ottawa Holocaust Monument Committee for bringing us here together. My special thanks go to President Annette Wildgoose. Where is Annette? Oh, you're there, okay. A person of great heart and spirit, a wonderful organizer and a great friend of the Polish Embassy and the entire diplomatic corps in Ottawa. Standing here today as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we are bound not only to remember the tragic events of World War II, but also deeply reflect on their universal significance for the present and the future. World War II was the most devastating conflict in human history, claiming over 60 million lives worldwide. Occupied Poland was one of the main stages of these tragic events. It was on our occupied soil that the aggressors, Germans, Soviets, implemented their horrid plans. Former Nazi German concentration and extermination camp Auschwitz-Birkenau became the symbol of unimaginable cruelty. Auschwitz-Birkenau is not just a historical site, it is a universal symbol of inhumane suffering. The majority of victims there, Jews, nearly 1 million people. The second most numerous group, some 70,000, were non-Jewish Poles, and the third most numerous, about 21,000, Roma and Sinti. About 15,000 Soviet POWs and some 12,000 prisoners of other ethnic backgrounds, including Czechs, Belarusians, Yugoslavians, French, Germans and Austrians, also perished there. As a Pole, my consciousness is filled with images of history, including these events. I have visited and toured Auschwitz about 30 times in my life, and each time this place overwhelms me with its emotional silence and the weight of history. For us Poles, despite passing time, the topic of World War II is one of the cornerstones of our national identity. With this, we understand that in other parts of the world, access to knowledge about these events is much more limited. This is why we make sure that the education about the Holocaust and Auschwitz remains vital on global scale. It is through education that we have a chance to protect our future generations from similar tragedies. Today, at Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, the extensive commemorations are coming to a close. A large-scale event with participation of thousands of guests from around the world. Around 50 survivors. 4 of them spoke in the presence of the heads of states and governments, including Poland's President Andrzej Duda, King of the United Kingdom Charles III, Prime Minister of Canada Justin Trudeau, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and many more. This recognition is extremely important. It helps to carry the message to the entire world, a message of humility in the face of unimaginable drama. For all of us, including diplomats, civic organizations, educators, the duty to preserve the memory is crucial. We must resist disinformation that seeks to diminish or distort the truth about the Second World War. Our task is to promote wisdom that will help prevent such tragedies from recurring in future. In a moment, you will hear from my good colleague, Mr. Piotr Dzielski. He has been director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum since 2006. He has been an icon to those dedicated to preserving the memory of World War II, the Holocaust, promoting human rights and combating distortion, anti-Semitism and intolerance. For myself, I thank you for your presence here and commitment to this exceptional anniversary. Together, let us build the world where Auschwitz remains only a historical symbol and not a returning reality. Thank you.
Dear friends, only by that way I can be present with you in Ottawa, in Canada, on this very day of the liberation of Auschwitz. It's a very special and moving day. We are celebrating, of course, the liberation, but we are thinking about all the victims of the German Nazi camp. We are thinking about the victims of the Shoah all around the occupied Europe. We are commemorating all those people who were fighting against the Nazi Germany. But we are, first of all, together with the last quite important group of survivors who were able to join us at this very place of Auschwitz-Birkenau for those ceremony. I think the remembrance now is something absolutely crucial for the future of our world, a future that is certainly not predictable in an easy way. We don't know what will be in 2, in 5, in 10 years. There are so many problems in so many parts of our world. The aggression of Russia against Ukraine as a very complex situation in the Middle East, also in Israel, many other problems that we are observing around the world. But I think that the remembrance is one of the most important, perhaps, key in order to oblige us to rethink our way to act, our way to not do anything sometimes, our way to think about the future of the world, our way to define our own place in this world. I would like to thank you, the Ambassador Dzielski, and all the team of the Polish Embassy to organize this gathering for the anniversary of the liberation and for this incredible day of commemoration. I hope that it will be one step for a world where all kind of anti-Semitism, xenophobia, hate speeches will play a less present role than it is sometimes now. Thank you.
Allow me to first thank the National Holocaust Monument Committee for their invitation to speak on this very important and solemn occasion. The committee's tireless work to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive should never be taken for granted. It is a gift to all of us, so thank you. We are gathered today to mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, a moment to reflect on the horrors of the Holocaust, a tragedy in which 6 million Jews were murdered simply because of who they were. Auschwitz stands as a haunting reminder of where unchecked hate, indifference, and propaganda can lead. L'Holocauste n'est pas commencé avec des chambres à gaz. Il a commencé avec des mots et la haine. Cette haine persiste aujourd'hui, malheureusement, amplifiée par la puissance de l'Internet et la désinformation. Canada has yet always been a beacon of diversity and inclusivity, but the last year and a half has taught us that we are not immune to the rising tide of anti-Semitism. We see it on our streets, in our schools, and on our university campuses. That is why Holocaust and anti-Semitism education are more critical now than ever. The newly released Canadian Handbook on our working definition of anti-Semitism is therefore an important tool for all Canadians. It helps Canadians identify the anti-Semitic tropes and misinformation that still exists today, many of which echo the propaganda used during the Holocaust. By understanding how anti-Semitism manifests, we empower ourselves to challenge hate and foster a society rooted in dignity and respect. Today, as we honor the memory of the victims and the inspiration of the survivors, we must recognize that remembrance is not passive. It is a call to action. We must teach one another to identify the warning signs of hatred, resist intolerance in all of its forms, and uphold the true promise of never again.
That was Deborah Lyons, Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism. I'd like to invite Father Deacon Andrew Bennett, Program Director for Faith Communities at Cardis and Deacon in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, to offer remarks.
What does one Christian do when confronted by hatred and the demonization of his fellow human beings? The faithful Christian looks to the example of Christ on the cross, who emptied himself for the life of the world. As we remember today the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and all that it represents, I am mindful of 3 of my fellow Ukrainian Greek Catholic clergy who sacrificed their security for the sake of others. Blessed Omilian Koch, pastor of prisoners at Majdanek. He said this when he learned that his fellow Greek Catholics were trying to save him from Majdanek in 1944. I understand that you are trying to free me, but I am asking you not to do anything. Yesterday they killed 50 people here. If I were not here, who would help them to endure these sufferings? I thank God for his kindness to me. Apart from heaven, this is the only place I'd like to be. Here we are all equal: Poles, Jews, Ukrainians, Russians, Latvians, and Estonians. I am the only priest here. I couldn't even imagine what would happen here without me. Here I see God, who is the same for everybody, regardless of the religious distinctions which exist among us. Do not worry, and do not despair about my fate. Instead of this, rejoice with me. Blessed Clementi Szeptycki, hegumen of the Univlavra, priest martyr, who worked with his brother Metropolitan Andrei Szeptycki, Metropolitan of Lviv and Halich, to save dozens of Jews, often hiding them in the monastery or the palace of the Metropolitan of Lviv, forging false identity documents, including saving the sons of the rabbi of Lviv. Metropolitan Andrei Szeptycki wrote this in 1936, seeing what was coming. Dear brothers, I must warn you very decisively, seriously, and before God against any acts of violence under the guise of so-called anti-Semitism that is being so strongly promoted by part of the Polish press and by others. Divine law commands us to avoid all wrongdoing to our neighbors, and each person knows that it would be an injustice to beat, kill, slander, harm our neighbor's health and property, set his house on fire, destroy his belongings. All of this is against divine law. It is a sin. It is a mortal sin, whether it be committed against Christians or against non-Christians. This is why I very much caution you against inciting such acts of violence. These powerful words remind us about how we must act in the face of resurgent anti-Semitism. While we must remember the past, especially on this day, this 80th anniversary, and we must clearly understand the horrors that occurred, we do not live in the past. We live now. So what will I do now? What will I do in the face of escalating hatred of Jews, Canadian Jews, my friends, my neighbors, my colleagues, my fellow students, my fellow citizens? I must act. I must speak out without equivocation about the grave violation of human dignity that anti-Semitism is. It is the abject failure to recognize the image and likeness of God in another person. As a Christian, as a Ukrainian Greek Catholic, I must be the Szeptycki brothers now. I must be Omilian Koch. And through their inspiration and prayers, I will act. All of us will act without relenting. May their memory be everlasting.
Thank you, Father Deacon. And you are unquestionably the winner of the most appropriately dressed person here today. I'd next like to welcome Noah Shack, the interim CEO of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, to offer remarks. Noah?
80 years ago, Zalman Pila was liberated from Auschwitz, and Pola Weintraub was liberated from Bergen-Belsen. Against all odds, they survived the Nazi death camps, the sole survivors of their large families. They found each other again after the war, married in a DP camp, and came to Canada to rebuild their lives, seeking out the promise of this great country. Zalman and Pola worked hard. Zalman sold fruit from his truck in Kensington Market in Toronto, and Pola shrewdly invested the earnings. Building family, building community, always ready to help a neighbor in need. They didn't just benefit from the promise of Canada, they contributed to it. Today, as we stand here together, I ask, what has become of the promise of Canada? What does the future of this country hold for Zalman and Pola's 17 great-grandchildren, some of whom are my own kids? Over the past 15 months, we've seen Jewish schools shot at, synagogues firebombed, violent mobs on our streets calling for the destruction of our people, calling for Jews to be sent back to Europe, terrorist flags waving proudly while Canadian flags are burned. Is this the future any of us wants for our children? We must remember that never again is an empty slogan if it is just about being regretful of the past. Never again is about our resolve to fight for a better present and, most importantly, for a better future. The story of Zalman and Pola is the story of one family, but it's the story of many Canadians. For never again to have any meaning, we must all draw on their spirit, roll up our sleeves, and urgently act to fight for the promise of this great country. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Karen Palayo, Chair of the Jewish Federation of Ottawa. Karen, please come forward.
Good morning, bonjour, shalom. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour la Journée internationale de commémoration de l'Holocauste. Nous marquons cette année le 80e anniversaire de la libération du camp de concentration et d'extermination d'Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Jewish Federation of Ottawa is privileged to partner with the National Holocaust Memorial Committee, and we thank the dignitaries, community members, and our youth for being here to participate in this solemn commemoration. We stand here together to honor the memory of the 6 million Jews and the millions of other victims who were murdered during the Holocaust. And we stand here today honoring the survivors. Unfortunately, Rose Katz had to leave because of the cold. I can't blame her. But we stand here honoring the survivors, recognizing their extraordinary strength and resilience over so many years.
One of Federation's most impactful Holocaust-related programs is the March of the Living, an educational program for Jewish high school students from around the world. In preparation, the Ottawa students learn about the history of Jews living in Poland and throughout Europe, the rise of hatred and anti-Semitism, and how this ultimately led to genocide. They learn about the victims and the perpetrators, the bystanders, the collaborators, and the righteous among the nations. The students then embark on a journey, spending 1 week in Poland, bearing witness to the tragedies of our past, followed by 1 week in Israel, celebrating the survival of the Jewish people. In Poland, the students traveled to several concentration camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau. They visit towns that were once home to thriving Jewish communities, and they walk deep into forests, concealing large mass graves. The students have had the privilege to travel alongside Holocaust survivors who share their personal stories of loss and survival. There is a powerful quote by Elie Wiesel that says, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. The survivors are living witnesses to the horrors of the Holocaust, and in listening to their testimonies, the students become witnesses themselves. They, in turn, take on the sacred responsibility to preserve these stories and carry the voices of the survivors forward from generation to generation. Today, as we remember those who perished and honor the survivors, we look to our future with hope. Hope that through Holocaust remembrance and education, our youth will become the strong voices, ensuring that humanity never forgets the atrocities of our past and working towards a more peaceful world for all. Thank you. Merci. Toda rabba.
Hang in there, folks. We only got a couple more. Whew. David Gurnovsky from B'nai B'rith, Government Relations. If you would please come forward, David, and say a few words. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Yep. Good morning, everyone. I'm here today on behalf of B'nai B'rith Canada, this country's most senior human rights organization, which is proudly celebrating its 150th anniversary this year. 2025 also marks a more solemn milestone, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. It is insufficient to merely mark the somber occasion. Our paying tribute to over the 1 million people who died in Auschwitz, who perished there, must serve as an impetus for change. Il est inacceptable qu'à peine 80 ans après la libération des camps d'extermination nazis, notre pays soit inondé par une vague croissante d'antisémitisme. Our government must act now to return substance to the phrase never again. Those who preach hate must face consequences. Those who literally and metaphorically fly the flags of terrorists, yes, terrorists, must be held accountable. The government must also ban the display of the Nazi swastika, joining 18 other countries that have already done so. Près de 10 000 Canadiens ont signé l'appel de B'nai B'rith en faveur de l'interdiction de symboles honteux et haineux. Please add your voice by signing on to our website at bnaibrith.ca. Le Canada doit agir maintenant. Further, it is critical that the government fulfill its responsibility to ensure transparency with respect to its with respect to the nation's Holocaust records. Canadians deserve to know the extent to which prior governments were complicit in the immigration of alleged Nazi war criminals to Canada following the Second World War. David Matas, senior honorary counsel for B'nai B'rith Canada, stated, only through public access to Canada's Holocaust archives can we learn the lessons from those archives. Les générations futures des Canadiens ne doivent pas être privées de la possibilité de tirer des leçons du passé de notre nation. May the memories of the over 6 million victims of the Nazi persecution never be forgotten. And forever be a blessing. Thank you. Thank you.
Cantor Green of Kehilat Beth Israel Synagogue will come forward to sing Oseh Shalom B'Merovav, composed by Cantor Meir Finkelstein for his album Liberation, a choral symphony in 1995, the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Cantor Green. I'd now like to call upon 6 people to come forward to light candles, to be followed by Kaddish prayers by Rabbi Iddo Sher. So Joel Diener, I understand Ruth Katz and Flora Love have left. Flora Love, you can come forward, please, over here. Richard Marceau, Richard, my daughter Maja, Annette, and Henry Topaz. Please come forward.
Not too many years ago, we stood at Majdanek, at that very spot where Pinchas Guter, a Canadian Holocaust survivor and a recent appointee to the Order of Canada for the Holocaust education he had committed his life to. And we stood at that very spot where he last saw his sister before she walked into the gas chambers. He never could remember the face of his sister after that moment, but forever he would remember her long golden braids. And we said Kaddish at that moment for Pinchas Guter's sister and for every single one of the victims of the genocidal Jew hatred that occurred 80 years ago. And we continue on to Israel. And as we continued on to Israel, we took comfort and strength knowing that the world had learned the lesson of never forget, and that when we would say Kaddish for the victims of a genocidal Jew hatred, it would be for those who far, far in the past. Imagine how heartbreaking, imagine how deeply unsettling it is that today, as we say Kaddish for victims of genocidal Jew hatred, it's not just for those in the past. Rather, even today, as we find out the news that a number of the hostages to be returned are going to be returned to their beloved families for burial. We ask everyone to please rise as we recite the Kaddish for the victims of the Holocaust and for the anti-Semitism and the genocidal Jew hatred that devastatingly impacts us to this very day. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabba bi'alma divra chirusei v'yamlich malchusei b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol beis Yisrael ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shemei Rabba mevarach li'olam u'li'olmei olmaya. Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yispa'ar v'yisromam v'yisnaseh v'yishadar v'yisale v'yisalal shemei dekutsha berichu le'ela min kol berchasa v'shirasa tush bechasa v'nechamasa da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Please remain standing for Hatikva from Bergen-Belsen.
Thank you. rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today and toughing it out. Merci beaucoup. Chankuya Barza. Tadaraba. We are going to ask all of the dignitaries to come forward for a photo op with the We Remember signs, many of which blew away. Please come forward. And that concludes our official ceremonies today. Okay, thank you.